Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the B2B Insights podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have Shaun Myers from Brenntag join me on the B2B Insights podcast. For those of you that don't know who Brenntag are, they're a global chemical and ingredient distribution company, founded in 1874 in Berlin. The company is headquartered in Essen, Germany, but has operations in more than 77 countries worldwide. With revenue of close to 13 billion euros and over 17,000 employees worldwide, then they are a fundamental cog in the global chemical sector. So, I want you to welcome me and join me in welcoming Shaun to the CX Practitioners podcast. Thanks for joining me today, Shaun.
Cheers, Nick. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure for me. So thank you.
No, thank you. I know you're busy, so thanks for getting this time in the diary. And diving straight in terms of the questions, I always like to just have a bit of background to the guest for the listeners. And your career started at DS Smith, where you spent 9 years before moving to Brenntag. And since then, since 2004, you've worked at Brenntag, various different roles, but now in a position of Director of Supply Chain and Service. And what I do know working alongside you is that role has a lot of responsibilities for group operations, safety, logistics, and of course, customer experience delivery. So my first question therefore is, how do you get time to fit it all in?
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick, and thanks for the resume check. But I'm not sure it'll convince anybody that I'm not as old as I look. Perhaps my appearance goes some way to answering the question, but no, definitely not. That's unfortunately my genes and not the job. And I do make that point because I think it is important that the biggest factor in fitting it all in is to love what you do, and I'm really fortunate to have a role that both challenges and invigorates me. And the biggest factor in that is the very fact that what many would consider multiple facets and different segments, I get to bring together. And I think as much as perhaps a pure, if I was a pure CX practitioner, it might allow me to dig a lot deeper into the role and develop an even a better appreciation of the subject. I can only imagine how frustrating that actually would be to constantly have to seek approval from different people or to influence others to try and make changes on behalf of the customer. So, getting those separate parts of an organization to come together to modify how they interact, will have major problems. And I think, again, those changes as well can potentially have a negative impact actually on the performance of that silo or how they are viewed and even certain people's paychecks, for example. And that's the way many organizations are structured. But fortunately, me being accountable for all those functions that you've mentioned gives me an incredible opportunity to be able to directly influence a significant proportion of the Brenntag customers' journey, as well as my overall role in heading up service. So I think, again, ultimately all of these functions need to work together, much like any kind of organism. They've all got to work in cooperation with each other, and only that way will we ever be able to deliver a great service for people when we're actually working and being uniform in that goal and objective. So I think when it comes to breaking that role down, first and foremost, fundamentally, our colleagues need to feel safe to be able to deliver on a great service, and we operate in that hazardous environment, and that's just fundamental in getting those guys to be able to do what they want to do, and then making sure that they've got the resources, the infrastructure, again, so we can deliver on all those promises. So being strategically well placed to offer the service, we need to be invested in the right areas, and we need to be efficient as well as effective, because yes, of course, we've got to generate profits that we can reinvest and we can keep growing and delivering an enhanced service. So yeah, there's a lot to do, but I think ultimately that breadth of responsibility and the accountability that comes with it, that gets me out of bed and gives me a great buzz.
Well, I mean, I know it does, and that enthusiasm comes through. But I think you're being modest as well, Shaun, with yourself, because that being a pure CX practitioner, okay, you would spend more time in the role, but I don't know, you've done the various training. You're very well read in terms of the topic, and you've got your wider team to deliver that. But you're right. You've got your team, but I think that empowering of people, and especially in Brenntag's case, like you say, safety is fundamental, but being able to empower people to make those decisions, to make an impact on customer service is something that we've seen and we'll definitely touch upon more today.
No, for sure.
Specific to Brenntag's CX customer experience journey, how did it all begin then? Where did the initiative come from, and when did it start?
It was about 4 or 5 years ago now. You mentioned in your introduction that Brenntag is a circa 150-year-old company, and clearly over that time has seen massive change, and unfortunately a lot of growth, and an awful lot of that growth has been fueled by acquisition. And acquisitions from all over the world. So, that clearly introduces a significant mix of business cultures coming in. So I think, given that, I think it was obvious to the board at that time that really, in order to facilitate more organic growth, as well as future acquisition integration, that the business wanted to identify and establish a strong brand, and create a kind of central cultural identity too. And therefore that kind of led then onto the organization. They developed this proposition and fundamentally call out to the business that we are a service organization, and we had to be recognized as such. So we kind of came up with this service excellence in terms of what our customers should expect, what our colleagues should expect from us, but we had no definition of that and what it really meant to the organization. So working with the group ops director at that time, we were asked to define what service excellence should mean to Brenntag, how we can measure it, how we can improve it. And then that quickly kind of moved on to the way in which we view the organization, and the fact that we needed to look at the company outside in rather than inside out, has it been the case up to that point.
Yeah, and so it's always been there, but that focus of attention really started around 5 years ago. And I know, well, B2B International, we've been working you for over 4 years. We came in quite early on in the journey. Obviously, you're having internal discussions, but over that time, we've definitely seen a lot of change. And thinking back to the start, that there might be some listeners out there wanting to embark on their new CX program. Is there any top tips, or the pain that you've been through? Is there anything that you could recommend that they could do, or when embarking on their journey?
Yeah, I mean, a few things, but I think certainly fundamentally, and the first thing is to understand from the outset that this is going to be difficult. I know it's a bit cliche, but that you have to steel yourself to be resilient, because as utterly instinctive as customer experience is to many of us, it isn't to everybody, and it certainly might not be to your corporate culture either. Businesses, organizations are built around decades of system-long development, procedures and structures, all to support the business as is. And then, a CX practitioner is potentially then coming in with new ideas, fancy ideas, basically telling everybody what they've been doing has been wrong, and we need to change. And I know that sounds a little dramatic, but
true.
That is how some people will see it, and I think you've just got to be prepared for that. And again, I am kind of talking to the any potential kind of people venturing into this for the first time, and I think anybody that's been through it will recognize that. But I think that would be my kind of first kind of forewarning, not to be just think that it's going to be a bed of roses, but and kind of then leading on to that, really try and get as much support from the very top of the business that you can. I know many practitioners, as you said earlier, I have read numerous books, spoken to numerous people on the subject, and they will generally tell you that basically it's impossible to achieve any meaningful cultural change without that commitment from the from the CEO. And I can certainly testify that it's very, very hard, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. I think I was fortunate that I had a mandate, but that mandate only, ventured as far as just exploring the subject, seeing what it meant, how it could be put into the business. It certainly wasn't universally understood, and it certainly wasn't acknowledged, and hence, supported from the top. But the thing we did was, we built it from the front line up. And made a business case that ultimately can't be ignored. And I think it's more difficult that way, but it is doable. So again, don't be put off if this isn't a North Star coming down from the C-suite that we've got to do this.
Yeah.
And then kind of lastly, I think, get to know your business. Make sure you do understand your business. Per the previous question you asked me, I've spent my career in hands-on sales roles, service roles, operation roles, and then management roles. And you need to understand how your company ticks, where the levers are, the pitfalls, or the places to avoid. Where to go to for that support. And look, I'm sure it can be done, but I'd strongly suggest CX leaders should come from within the business if they can, possibly not a specialist role kind of parachuted in. You'll need that advice, and you'll need that kind of real expert knowledge and things like that. But I do feel it's still got to be driven from the inside.
I really like that. Every one of those points. First of all, and like you say, maybe it's cliche, but you do need to be resilient. You need to have courage, and you will get knockbacks. It's not plain sailing. And in order to do that, like you say, from the top down, from the CEO, it makes it easier. But like you say, you cannot just have that buy-in. You need to deliver results. You need to demonstrate results, so you can't be ignored. And you can't do it on your own. So you're right. You've climbed the ladder within Brenntag. You've had various different roles, and therefore, you can empathise with colleagues when speaking to them.
Yeah.
And I think it's I love those 3 points. I think the starting point when we started out on our journey. Of course, we're on a journey. We need to create a map. So we had a pan-European customer journey mapping workshop where we brought lots of your colleagues together. Giving us an overview of what it's like to walk in the shoes of as a Brenntag customer. How important do you believe it was to start the process with that workshop?
Massively. I can only think it would be the same for any corporation, but bearing in mind this, that we're still a large, big industrial product technology orientated organization. That workshop was absolutely crucial to get us to start think outside in, like I mentioned earlier, and then really also importantly was getting these colleagues from the other regions involved. So we did broach colleagues and got colleagues engaged from other parts of EMEA initially. And I think the initiative very much could have stalled at an early stage if we didn't have that engagement, and if this was seen as a, kind of something unique, something different that the UK was doing. But to actually, albeit only maybe a handful or a dozen people kind of engaged at that stage, just enough to, so that it wasn't brand new when then kind of being pushed out into the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we didn't want it to be a UK initiative, as you say. So yeah, the pilot was UK, and I think it was Hungary off memory.
Yeah.
And then obviously the results from that, there was a thirst, there was an interest, and then starting to roll that out globally, which obviously is where we got to. But the first initial stage was, following that workshop, was a deep dive study, understanding this customer experience in depth. You didn't have, obviously you had lots of information, but you didn't have the depth of knowledge from a third party survey. So from the initial stage, we had lots of data. We had a stake in the ground of how the business was doing. And I hope you don't mind me saying, but for example, the NPS as a world renowned metric, of course, it was 7. So by the way, we've seen negative NPSs, but there was lots of opportunity for improvement. So I know the story on that.
Yes, sorry, I did lose you for a minute there, but yeah. I mean, ultimately, we and thanks for pointing out the 7 starting point, but it is a starting point, and I think that it creates a little bit of a kind of a wake up call on its own kind of thing, but we didn't have anything to put that into perspective. But I think the big thing, recognizing that we'd done the work before, we'd put some groundwork in before. We knew that this had to be a bit a big bang moment for us. It just couldn't be a case of well, we've done a deep dive survey. Here's lots of information. Isn't it all very interesting? And kind of end it there. We were much more committed to that. We had a plan, and we just knew we needed to get more engagement. So we recruited a CX manager quite early on in the process, and that was a real demonstration, I think, of our commitment to the plan. We're a very lean organisation with a strong headcount focus. So just that on its own, in terms of creating a new position, something a bit different, that grabbed attention. And then, we also took a lesson from health and safety. We looked at where we'd managed to change culture and have a little bit of success, and said, well, how can we replicate that? So, some of the things that we did there, we created this multifunctional customer experience executive team to kind of guide the process, and also we made sure that CX was put, as is health and safety, on every single agenda for every single meeting. Again, just to make sure people were talking about it. It was there, however brief it might be, that, again, this wasn't just something that was going to go away. Again, per health and safety, we set up CX teams at every site and location to look at their local scores, results, sentiment that was in there, create local initiatives, and all of which the CX manager obviously supported, and myself and others. And then, but it was never going to be enough, just me and one other, and we needed to create a really strong core team, as obsessive about service as we were. And there we sought volunteers. We went out to the business and said we were doing something different. We wanted 25 people to attend this master practitioner program, a full 10-day training course across 4 different sessions with lots of work in between times, reading, etc., project work, and we got that team of 25, and that was hugely important as well. And kind of following a bit Cotter-esque, we communicated endlessly about what we were doing and how we were going to do it. I think then also we recognised, again, this kind of making sure that the deep dive results didn't go in the drawer, as real time as we could get at that time. The pulse surveys, which we started to do monthly, just to keep the customer's voice in and live and coming into the business. As I say, we've been guilty in the past of doing a kind of biannual survey, and it produces some interesting results and then goes in a drawer, and kind of that's that. So we had to do something different then. And then I think, fortunately, because of some of that good work, and again your guys' input into that, we did get some really good, excellent colleague engagement early on, and that translated into some traction early on in terms of where this was all going, and that started to get the attention of some of those colleagues around the globe that we've touched on. We were doing something different in the UK, and it appeared to be having an impact. And I think most importantly at all, it comes down to that enthusiasm. The number of people that I spoke to that kind of approached me and said, "What the hell are you feeding these guys in the UK? All they want to do is talk to us about CX, no matter what subject we're on, what topic." And again, that was massive. And I think that on its own, we all, as managers, leaders, want our teams to be engaged and excited and enthused and positive, and it was a way of getting that, and it was delivering that. So and if I'm honest, it was always the plan. I had a good appreciation of, I think, how I felt this would have been perceived if it was a central mandated corporate project. Bump, we're going to do this, we're going to do lots of measuring, we're going to create lots more numbers, etc. And therefore I took the responsibility on myself and just said, no, we're going to get people envious of what we're doing. That's the best way to get this in there. Is to create a bit of noise, a bit of a stir, and get people curious, and that happened. And as I would always say, a bunch of willing volunteers is always going to achieve a lot more than a strong-armed corporate group. So and it started to snowball a little bit from there. We got more and more kind of inquiries from around the globe, people asking me to jump on calls with them, explain what we were doing, and that thankfully then grew into rolling out the deep dive program to all of the other regions, and with a vision that they would replicate the UK with regards to training and monthly tracking, etc., etc. So
yeah. And I think you're right. We've seen it with other clients as well, but I mean, especially with Brenntag, that enthusiasm, people putting their hands up and saying, "This is for me." You're not forcing people to do it. So they were enthused by it at the start, and so they're bought into it. And then we've talked about it demonstrating results, and when it demonstrates, bottom line growth results, then the rest of the organization and the from a global perspective starts to wake up and say the difference. But you're right. I think also there's commonality in what I see with others. In as soon as you put a CX manager in place, and especially like you say, if it's a new role, it does start to again create questions asked. So what? Oh, this is something new. What we must be doing something there. And I think there's so many different little catalysts, isn't there, in terms of how you create this. There's a big plan, and then there's the various different tactics along the way, of which some of those are definitely part of that. And I think this CX initiative then was starting to gather momentum globally. And if we just look at the UK for an example, we've seen the NPS jump a massive 56%. 56 points. So I'll remind you again, Shaun, it was 7, but I'll also remind you that 56-point jump to 63 is absolutely fantastic. And especially when you look back and reflect on where we started in 2017. So we've talked about a few of those catalysts just then, but what do you think were the main ones for driving this positive change within Brenntag? Or is it just building on what you've already mentioned?
Well, it is building on what was mentioned, but I equally, it's important. We did have a plan. This wasn't just some sort of naive, let's create an awful lot of noise, let's create a lot of fuss, and it will work wonders and will do. There was a plan there, and a big part of that plan, well, all of the plan more or less, I'll be honest, kept quiet, because I knew how new the subject still was, and how it might be perceived in the organization if we went out with this. So again, tried to do as much of this as subtly, let's say, as possible. But yeah, the plan right from the start was to have sort of 10 to 15% of our colleagues trained at quite a high level, and that again based on a theoretical number, quite honestly, with a view that would be a sufficient quantity to help drive change, remove blockers, etc. So in addition to the initial 25 we've talked about, there was then we internally trained another 100 members of staff in different groups over a 12-month period, using combinations of video, online, self-learning, face-to-face. And again, the important thing is that all 100 were volunteers. And that was based, again, they'd seen the 25, they'd seen the noise, they'd heard the noise, and wanted to be part of it. And really important. We did, we picked some of those because we were fortunate we got more than 100 volunteers, but very important that we made sure that we were fully represented, not only from a site perspective, but also functions. So, every area of the business there represented. So yeah, that group, clearly helped transform the culture. along with the ongoing, they were fed the survey information, the alerts, the communication. We went and did, if we would refer to that 100 as our green belts, as we do, we also then carried on with yellow belt training. So again, everybody else in the business had a basic understanding of what we were trying to achieve. And again, I think that is so important, that it's not just seen as some functional excellence on its own right, that it's everything and everybody has got a part to play. So if that was one thing. So the kind of people focused side of it was one thing, but then clearly we also needed to put, and these bits went more positively, let's say, with some of the techie people within our organization, and we had to put the practical pieces in there as well. So one example, at the time of the deep dive, we were getting a lot of negative feedback around information, product supply, technical information, questionnaires coming in. And a lot of those were from, not exclusively, but the majority from our life science customer base, which is a big sector for us. So, we established a small team just of 3 people in our central services building at Leeds, and we put them to work on fielding all of these technical inquiries. Ultimately that went very quickly from being the absolute number one topic of those life science customers in terms of their issue with Brenntag to off the agenda. We very rarely hear about it at all now, because we just put that in place. The guys manage it well, keep track. They're talking directly with the customers, and that doesn't cause any problems with, account management or anything like that. And, ultimately we've become credible, reliable on the technical front. So yeah, it's important. Other things along those lines, our mobile delivery solution, we introduced new technology, put tablets in place of paperwork for all our drivers, which helped eliminate a lot of the inaccuracies the paper-based system had, especially around bulk liquid chemical delivery. As you can imagine, delivering 25,000 litres to get that absolutely spot on to the litre every time is difficult. And of course, we only want to invoice exactly what we've delivered, and therefore relying on that being a weighbridge ticket printed and transposed onto a delivery piece of paperwork correctly, and everybody being able to understand that it just transformed a lot of that. So it took away a lot of niggles, sped that whole delivery confirmation process up, and took care of an awful lot of noise there as well. I would say as well, in terms of some of the communication, that is a vital tool. We've used that, those tablets to be able to send video messages to the guys out that are particularly kind of remote workers, health and safety side of things as well. So that's been good. And again, another feature from that, which addressed one of the topics, the continual topics, is around packaging. And again, that really helped us to further develop our returnable, reusable packaging system. Being able to know exactly where the containers are at, the quantities at customers when we go on site, etc. It's meant that we've broadened that offering out into the marketplace. We've reduced the hassle of customers having to arrange and pay for disposal, and along with that, obviously the huge environmental benefits that's brought too. So, a real mixed air of some of the people and the cultural things, and then recognizing the practical elements that you have to put in place there too.
Yeah, and I think again, just to bring it together from me hearing you speak there, Shaun, it's the people side first and foremost. Again, those 100 colleagues or whatever, we need to bring the people on side to believe in it, and then to deliver it. I think, and from that, it's aligned with the surveys that we were doing for you. So listening, and listening really hard to what customers say, in terms of what they want. But what you did do is you took that on board and you made those changes, and some of it is small changes, some of it is quite innovative changes. From whether it's the packaging, whether it's the new system that's put in place with mobile devices, or whether it's just putting more people in a centralized place that can, and telling the customers, if you've got a problem, speak to these, 3 technical experts. It's they were real, there's some small and some larger changes, aren't there? But over time, it all creates this massive jump that we've seen in terms of MPS, and I know that's just one MPS is one of the metrics that you look to cover there, but it's I suppose that big picture story of where we were and where we've gone to helped Brenntag and B2B International become the award winners at last year's CX Awards in 2020.
Yes.
It does take a lot of hard work. You've only just mentioned, 3 specifics there, and if you track it over time, over those quarters, over the years, we hit plateaus, of course, but it's not always that linear journey of how you might track an MPS.
No.
And so, what do you think the key challenges that you've faced over that time that you had to overcome during the 4 years of the program so far?
Well, there was a few, to be fair. I think got to acknowledge that it's, as you say, it's not plain sailing, and I think we've also got to acknowledge that it isn't finished by a long stretch. We've reached some peaks, which is fantastic, but yeah, they're not going to be sustainable by just taking our foot off the gas now. So, and look, we still have to work hard every day to get the culture into the hearts and minds of colleagues. Again, I keep referencing we've got a lot of technically very competent individuals. They're facing product application issues every day, and it's still a job convincing those guys it isn't just soft and fluffy stuff. It isn't just this customer service department's responsibility. It's everybody, and that remains a challenge. I mentioned the getting the C-suite involved earlier on, and those guys set the agenda, and if CX isn't on it, that's a massive hurdle in persuading colleagues to get on board who are, like many companies these days, we're a kind of matrix type organization in terms of reporting line structures, and if it isn't getting talked about in every quarter, then it becomes difficult. So again, I come back to our view, our plan of getting these colleagues on board, getting them trained up, getting them enthusiastic, and getting that first line there, and then clearly creating some quick wins on the back of that and some momentum. That's vital. And then really, trying to group things together. Technology is a big issue for us as well. We didn't have all the systems. We don't have all the systems there connected, talking to each other, joined up, and therefore we've had to be pretty creative in resolving some of those difficulties. And that creative, it doesn't have to be difficult. It is the trick there is to keep that as simple as possible, and I think that works. We'll continue to get smarter, which will help, but you can't allow any of that to become a blocker. You've just got to find another way around it.
Yeah. And like you say, keeping it simple. I think one thing that we see, and I think, it's communications often, communications internally. We've talked a lot about the people side, and communications out to the customers, letting them know what changes you're making and why, and the importance of them. And so they're vital in every CX program. And I do know that Brenntag has made sure that the CX comms has been pivotal both internally and externally for you. So it'd be good if you could just talk a bit about just the different types of communications that you've used to, we're talking about 17,000 people globally here, outside of the UK. So how do we spread the CX word, internally and then obviously externally to all those customers?
You're absolutely right. And early on, there was a very clear view from myself that we just can't communicate enough. It's as simple as that. So, the objective then, with that understanding, was to give ourselves as big a toolbox as possible in terms of getting the messages out there. So it's everything, good old fashioned posters. We create them internally, much of which from the information that you guys at B2B give us, and we manipulate that. Obviously, we put it into a storyboard for people. Again, it's simple. It's only done ourselves. We're not talking about going out to agencies and getting things printed. Keeping it simple. Then we can turn them around very quickly so that they don't become wallpaper, and people are constantly then looking for them and just using those to report the initiatives and the progress and the results. I think then other areas, I've personally presented at almost every session that I can get in front of people. And for somebody who doesn't actually like public speaking, that's not particularly pleasant, but I've taken it as a must do. As an executive team, we've always tried to get around every site early on in the year and actually give a bit of a business brief, a bit of an update. How did we get on last year? What are the plans, the ambitions for this year? Obviously, the last kind of year and a bit now have been very difficult getting in front of people. But so we've had to invent new ways of getting messages out, video messaging and such like, and Zoom calls and Teams calls and all that kind of good stuff. I've been lucky again because of some of the progress that we've made that I've been invited to go along to the European board meeting and present on what we've been doing. The global board then invited us along to go and talk to them as well, and then at the global conference as well, kind of just showcasing everything that we've done. So internally wise, that creating a lot of interest amongst again Brenntag colleagues. Basic stuff again, preparing monthly slide decks with information so that the teams locally on site who are doing all the work, they're not having to think too much for themselves. They're not having to get overly creative themselves, just feeding those guys. Monthly sales bulletins that we, again, have always done. We've converted that. We put a huge section in there now around service and how service has helped actually win or regain that customer. Couple of times a year, we publish a kind of more formal company newsletter. One of the nice things I always like about that is it goes to people's home addresses, so it might well be the partner or the wife or the husband or whoever opens that and has a look at it and sees what their other half's business is all about. What are they doing? And we created this customer journey map as you talked about, and we sent that to everybody. We got properly out, external party printed customer journey maps, and we put them in there, and again get people hopefully at home talking about it, kids, anybody, kind of, what's this all about, mum, dad? It's training, massive. So again, we get every functional team together a couple of times a year. So that's the credit control teams, the stock control teams, the customer service team. And again, we just CX is on the agenda, presentations, discussion points, exercises, dashboards, quotes, and LinkedIn, industry journals that we've published articles in. Mail shots to customers, exactly that, with the kind of you said we did messages in there around some of the changes we've made, what we've done. Just again, come back to the main point. We can't communicate enough, so we've kept that going as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, lots of different things that I know that you were doing, and those that are listening to the audio of this podcast can't see, but behind you, you've got the big journey that was visually scribed, and I think that's a really nice takeaway. That definitely started to engage and bring different parts of the business together, so they understood the whole view, and the way that it was visually put together is really nice. So I think that was a core component from my side that started to get the message across.
Definitely.
So CX is an important topic, as we know. We're nothing without our customers, but when we get into the fourth year and fifth year of a program, it can become a bit repetitive. How do you manage to keep the initiative front of mind within the organization, keep that momentum going?
I think I understand what you're saying with regard to the repetitive nature, but I have to say, I think it would be extremely dangerous if anybody in any company kind of felt that the customer's voice was repetitive, and making sure that is not the case, and fundamentally that's a big part of the trick. So that customer voice needs to be in the organization, and 100% definitely not just the metrics. I know we've got Net Promoter Score and we've got the E's and CSAT and things like that, and they're great metrics, but you've got to have that language and you've got to have the sentiment as well that the customers putting forward. So and again, part of that is people will question or challenge the scores. They'll question the understanding of Net Promoter Score on an individual basis. They get an 8 and turn around and say, well, look, it's a glowing reference. Well, it is a glowing reference, and be pleased about that, but there's a science behind it. It's an 8, it's a passive, get over it, and kind of move on. But when you see the words, when those words become live, people cannot pay attention. and those monthly pulse surveys, then the hot alerts that we set up with yourselves, are just absolutely invaluable for keeping that that customer voice front and center. And without looking to kind of blow any smoke, working with yourselves has been important, massively important. A third party like yourself brings insights, expertise, knowledge, and it gives massive credibility to what we're trying to achieve. I think sometimes alone, individually, you get very enthused. You can appear a little evangelical at times around kind of what you're doing, and nice that your bosses get to hear from somebody else that Shaun's not just going nuts. There is a lot of theory behind it, and what have you. So and then things like we arranged our first CX Day last year, and we coincided it with Valentine's Day because the whole message was love your customer, and that was a massive success. That was what it was intended to be, a celebration of everything we'd achieved to that point. So there was balloons and cakes and gifts for customers that the drivers got to hand out. So again, you're pulling people in that historically may have never seen their role as anything to do with the customer, or certainly delivering a fabulous customer service. But I mean, again, if I come back to the question that you asked, yeah, for sure that there's a bit of a cyclical nature. We collect data, we send data out, we get questionnaires back in, and we get service data, and that does have a monotony to it. But then you use the word momentum, and that's the big word there. We managed to get ahead of steam fairly early on and demonstrate that we're onto something. Yeah. Customer ratings improved, and so did every area of the business performance. Our overall business performance. I'm not going to share all the kind of data and KPI clearly with you guys and what have you, but our range selling statistics, our customer retention statistics, all of that other stuff that we measure had never been better in the business. And therefore it was, even the kind of most stubborn set in the ways people couldn't deny the correlation there. And again, that builds confidence in all of those people putting that extra effort in, that it's worth it, it's rewarded, that people are coming along for the journey. And then I think latterly, if we look back at the last year, I think perversely the pandemic has actually supported the efforts too, because the pride instilled in us as being designated as part of the critical national infrastructure. Again, you said it at the head about the chemical industry and our role in it, and really recognizing the importance of the work that we do in making sure that the companies that we supply, the drinking water's flowing, the lights come on for the energy providers, the food's on the shelf from the food manufacturers, surfaces and hands are germ-free from all the cleaning companies we provide. And that's really brought about a new level of purpose that has supported everything that we've been talking about to date.
Yeah. When I was putting my questions together, my final question was, I said, what one piece of advice would you give to the listeners that you think can make a customer experience program an award-winning CX program like the Brenntag customer experience program? Actually, from listening to your speech, Shaun, you've given us many different bits of advice, so I'm not sure you'll be able to pick one. So, but I'm still going to ask the question anyway.
Well, I tried, and I think I got it down to two. So I didn't think I was doing too bad, but definitely at risk of repeating myself, I think the first bit is just don't give up. It is hard. It can be isolating. And therefore lonely, and it's a strange word perhaps to use in business parlance, but it can be, and it will make you question yourself when others around you are not really believing in what you're doing, and test your commitment, and you've got to keep going. One of the things that kept me going, and still does, to be honest, is we created this nucleus, this small team, these 25 at the beginning, and I felt duty bound to them ever since. They got it. They bought in so much. It converted people's lives, to be honest with you, and career. And again, that sounds grand, but
no, it did. I know who you mean when you talk about that team.
That's there. So I think just keep the faith. Believe that the enthusiasm will grow. You'll get small wins. Make big things out of those small wins. And now and again as well, things will happen, and it makes your heart skip. It brings a huge smile to your face, and it drives you on. I guess that then leads on to the second one, which is then it's just make it fun. I think, so much of business isn't fun. And if you having fun, that creates an interest, a stimulus, and yeah, it goes far even to say maybe jealousy of certain quarters of the business. And, and I've always said good,
Yeah.
make people jealous, make other department heads jealous or whatever. And what you'll find is that their guys want to come and join in and have some fun too. So,
Yeah.
again, make it fun. I think if it's done right, it inherently is fun, delivering a CX program, because you get that people engagement, you get that people focus. So, yeah, sorry I couldn't keep it to one, but
No, well, it was a tough ask anyway, Shaun. But
two key points maybe.
I think that's just a fabulous way to finish this conversation, because I think, too often, if I think back to the journey that we've been on with Brenntag, and I'm sure you'd say you've got to, health and safety is paramount within the chemical business. And, you were quite a conservative business. And if we'd have said, 4 or 5 years on, you'd have people dressing up and having all this fun, and, that this curiosity that you've developed globally in the customer, this enthusiasm. I mean, it comes from your own personal, character as well, but I think it's just one fabulous journey and a great story on how you can move a business, a siloed global business, into one that's really placing the customer at the center of it. So well, and also you said there, it's a lonely business. Well, I think hopefully, the people listening, they won't feel lonely anymore, because they'll, but you've given them so much gold there, Shaun. I mean, I know you've not given away any trade secrets or anything, but just these small things. I really need to thank you for your time sharing there, and I'm very sure that all the listeners will be appreciative of all those wise words too.
Well, I hope so. I mean, one thing I did learn very early on is the teams, the guys involved in CX are ever so giving with their time and their stories. And again, I think it is that recognition of this loneliness, this kind of, you can very much feel isolated, and therefore, happy to share. And I have to say, yeah, I'm hooked. I'm completely myself in terms of that. And again, it's just therefore only genuinely just a real pleasure to be able to talk to you. And if somebody gets one little snippet of something that helps them along the way, then brilliant, job done.
Well, that's why I love you, Shaun, because you are so modest. There'll be more than one snippet. I can guarantee that. So, well, it's I know you're very busy, so I need to thank you again. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I presume they can find you on LinkedIn and reach out in that respect too.
No, definitely. I'd love to hear from anybody for sure.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time, Shaun. It's much appreciated, and speak to you soon.
Okay. Cheers, Nick. Thanks. Pleasure.